The movie starts with a group of workers deep in the Arctic excavating a frozen cave. As they dig, they stumble upon something embedded in the ice. Curious and eager to retrieve it, they carefully cut out a massive block and transport it via helicopter to a high-tech laboratory. Upon receiving the mysterious find, the scientists at the lab immediately send an urgent fax to the excavation company. Their message is clear: this is a groundbreaking archaeological discovery, and all drilling must be halted immediately. They also request the expertise of a specialist to examine whatever lies within the ice. Not long after, anthropologist Dr. Stanley arrives at the facility. An expert in Arctic history and Eskimo culture, he is introduced to Dr. Diane and her team of scientists who suspect they have unearthed a prehistoric animal. Drawing parallels to the discovery of a mammoth with viable cells in 1898, they are hopeful about what they might uncover. Using a precision laser, the scientists begin slicing away layers of ice, working meticulously to avoid damaging their find. However, as the frozen mass is slowly revealed, they are stunned. It isn't an animal at all. Inside the ice is a perfectly preserved Neanderthal. Stanley closely examines the caveman and estimates that he lived between 20 to 40,000 years ago, likely as a hunter. Intrigued, he wants to conduct a detailed study, but Diane informs him that their objective is to carefully extract the body, divide it into sections, and distribute it to top research centers around the world. As the thawing process begins, the team removes the caveman's ancient clothing and tools, collecting tissue samples while monitoring his brain activity. To their amazement, the results indicate that his organs and cells are in perfect condition. Diane hypothesizes that ancient humans may have possessed natural cryoprotectants, biological substances that prevent ice crystallization and cell damage. During their examination, an unexpected shock ripples through the team. Their instruments detect faint brain activity from the Neanderthal. This astonishing revelation prompts them to take a bold step. Deciding to attempt revival, they intubate the man and administer a series of defibrillator shocks. Soon, a strong heartbeat is detected. Against all odds, the Neanderthal is alive. As he regains consciousness, panic sets in. Disoriented by the unfamiliar environment, the buzzing machines, and the masked figures surrounding him, he thrashes in fear. Thinking quickly, Stanley removes his mask, revealing his face to the caveman. This simple act of familiarity soothes the frightened man, allowing the team to administer a sedative to calm him down. Once the caveman is stable, the scientists eagerly discuss the groundbreaking implications of their discovery. Some envision a Nobel Prize, while others consider the potential applications of their research. The Arctic team is already working on developing a cryoprotectant that could allow cancer patients to be frozen and revived when a cure is found. However, with the Neanderthal now in their possession, they believe they might be on the brink of something even greater, the key to human immortality. Stanley, however, strongly disagrees with this notion. He argues that humans were never meant to live forever, warning that tampering with the natural cycle of life could have dire consequences, especially in an already overpopulated world. Stanley's concerns are dismissed as the scientists agree to keep the discovery under wraps for now. They fear that revealing the Neanderthal's existence would turn him into a media sensation. However, Stanley insists that the best way to learn from the caveman is to study him in a naturalistic environment. After much pleading, he persuades the team to grant him 2 weeks for independent research. A special vivarium is soon constructed, and the Neanderthal is placed inside. When he awakens, the surroundings feel familiar, and he instinctively follows his usual routines. He quenches his thirst by squeezing juice from berries and scares off a bird to steal its eggs. At night, he skillfully starts a fire using stones and prepares his meal. His mornings begin with bathing beneath a waterfall before setting off to hunt with a spear he crafts himself. One day, as he hunts, a wild boar charges at him. The caveman swiftly dodges, and the boar ends up trapped between rocks, making for an easy kill. Later, while fishing, he stumbles upon a hose buried in the ground. Puzzled by the strange object, he sniffs and licks it before tugging at it, eventually tracing it back to a metal door. With forceful shakes, he manages to pry it open, sending the scientists into a panic. They quickly seal off a second door, preventing him from entering. From behind the barrier, strange creatures in the lab begin roaring. while the scientists create loud noises in an attempt to scare him off. Enraged, the Neanderthal scales the waterfall and discovers the machine powering it. Letting out furious screams, he attempts to destroy it, slamming his fists against the walls. Seeing no other choice, one of the scientists enters the vivarium and fires a tranquilizer dart at him. Once sedated, he is placed on a stretcher and transported to the operating room, where the team intends to collect samples as originally planned. Stanley protests, reminding them that his 2-week period isn't over yet, but Diane urges him to accept the situation. That night, he shows Diane a video featuring indigenous tribes performing firewalking rituals. When Diane dismisses it as a simple nerve block trick, Stanley counters that such an explanation accounts for the lack of pain but not the absence of burns or blisters. Fast-forwarding the footage, he points to a scene where a man pushes needles into his friend's face without drawing blood. He theorizes that certain tribes may produce a natural chemical that protects their skin, and suggests that the Neanderthal might have a similar biological adaptation. Intrigued, Diane allows Stanley to continue his research. When the caveman is returned to the vivarium, Stanley bravely enters as well, deliberately carrying no weapons or objects to avoid seeming like a threat. The Neanderthal reacts defensively, darting around the space, growling and searching for cover. Despite his fear, Stanley advances cautiously until they are face to face. Tension rises as the caveman suddenly leaps onto Stanley, lifting a rock to strike him. Before he can deliver a blow, a scientist's voice calls out from above, momentarily distracting him. When he realizes that Stanley isn't fighting back, he hesitates, then lowers the rock. Curious, he inspects Stanley more closely, fascinated by the differences in their appearances. He pokes his fingers into Stanley's mouth, tugs at his clothes, and pats his lower body as if checking for something unfamiliar. Stanley flinches in discomfort, causing the Neanderthal to step back. Moments later, he introduces himself with a name that sounds like Aru. Stanley decides to call him Charlie instead. In return, he teaches Charlie to say his own name, sparking a moment of laughter between them. Noticing the scars on Charlie's chest, Stanley gestures toward them, prompting the caveman to touch the marks and call them Bita, while pointing upward. As Stanley observes Charlie's scars and gestures, he starts to suspect that they represent the word bird. Meanwhile, Charlie, with an air of curiosity, snatches Stanley's cross necklace and bites it. He then starts repeating certain words and making hand gestures, but Stanley struggles to understand what he's trying to communicate. The following day, linguist Mabel arrives at the facility. Stanley eagerly shares a recording of his interaction with Charlie, but Mabel explains that she needs more material to decipher the language fully. Determined to bridge the gap, Stanley spends more time with Charlie, gradually picking up simple words for things like rock, frog, and bone. Their bond strengthens as Charlie shares his food, and in return, Stanley begins teaching him basic English words. Watching the interactions unfold on the cameras, Mabel is impressed by Charlie's growing vocabulary. One evening, as they sit around a fire, Stanley starts singing a song. Charlie, intrigued, encourages him to continue. While playing with bones from his meal, he attempts to join in, making sounds as if singing along. However, things take a dark turn when the scientists decide to sedate Charlie again to extract more samples. This time, they lower the temperature in a controlled environment, aiming to study his body's natural resistance to the cold. Stanley protests fiercely, arguing that they are pushing Charlie to his limits and treating him like a mere test subject. His fears are justified when Charlie's vitals drop significantly, forcing the scientists to halt the experiment and bring him back to safety. Back in the vivarium, Charlie is furious. He shouts at Stanley, clearly enraged by the constant experiments and the new scars they have left on him. In a sudden outburst, he slams his spear against the ground, frustration evident in his every move. He then holds it in a tense stance, as if questioning his own place in this situation. With a sorrowful expression, he gestures towards Stanley, seeking a way to escape his misery. But Stanley refuses. Frustration lingers between them, and after a tense moment, Stanley walks away from the vivarium. Later in private, Stanley turns to Diane for help. He confides in her that their research is alienating Charlie, and they are slowly losing the fragile connection they had built. He suggests that perhaps Diane's presence might have a calming effect on Charlie. When they enter the vivarium together, they find Charlie sitting on the ground, nursing his wounded hands. Using rock powder, he carefully traces the same bird-like symbol from his scars onto the ground. Diane, though nervous, is taken aback when Charlie immediately rushes toward her, inspecting her curiously. After sniffing her, he offers her food. Not wanting to offend him, Diane hesitantly eats it, despite it being made of insects. At first, Charlie's touch is harmless, but his curiosity soon crosses a line as he tries to examine Diane more closely. Sensing the shift, Stanley steps in, raising his voice and using the Neanderthal word for mine to make Charlie back off. In response, Charlie retrieves objects from his cave, seemingly offering them as a trade for Diane. Stanley refuses, but the exchange leaves Charlie in a somber state. He starts repeating the same words over and over, his expression filled with longing. When Mabel analyzes the footage, she believes she has discovered Charlie's word for woman, but something about his speech still eludes her. With some encouragement, Stanley and Diane ask Charlie to explain further. Using simple drawings on the ground, Charlie finally reveals the truth. He once had a wife and children. The realization hits hard as he starts running around, repeatedly asking for his family. Before they can process the weight of this revelation, a helicopter suddenly appears overhead, interrupting the moment. Since the ceiling is made of glass, Charlie spots the helicopter hovering above and instantly panics. His fear takes over and he begins climbing the rocky walls of the vivarium, repeatedly chanting, "Beta," his word for bird. The scientists, alarmed by his reaction, order the helicopter to leave, but Charlie remains unsettled. Reaching the top, he continues screaming "Beta" at the sky. Sometime later, Stanley travels to a remote Eskimo tribe, hoping to uncover the meaning behind Charlie's words. When he shares what he heard, the locals immediately recognize it. Excited by the revelation, Stanley rushes back to the lab to inform Diane. He explains that Beta refers to Sedna, a mythological bird believed to act as God's messenger, carrying souls to either heaven or hell, depending on their deeds. From this, Stanley theorizes that Charlie's tribe may have perished when a magnetic pole shift wiped out the local wildlife. Believing it to be divine punishment, Charlie likely embarked on a ritualistic dream walk, an offering of himself to the great bird in exchange for the return of the animals. Now convinced that the helicopter is Sedna, Charlie refuses to be calmed. 34 hours later, Charlie has adorned himself with all his belongings, clothing, tools, and trinkets given to him by Stanley over the past few days. Using crushed berries, he paints intricate designs on his skin. He remains in a trance-like state, chanting ceaselessly in anticipation of his god's arrival. Whenever Stanley enters the vivarium, Charlie hides, avoiding all communication. One afternoon, after observing Stanley's actions carefully, Charlie mimics him. He takes the stairs and instinctively presses the button, entering the lab with calculated caution. Slipping through the corridors unnoticed, he suddenly catches sight of his own reflection in a mirror. Mistaking it for a challenger, he growls aggressively before shattering the glass with his spear. A sudden voice over the speaker startles him, sending him sprinting down the hallway until he stumbles into a room filled with lab animals. He inspects the birds, but when a caged bear growls, he quickly moves on. Attempting to take another corridor, he collides with the glass doors. Frustrated, he tries again, and as they open automatically, he steps into another section of the facility. As he cautiously navigates the unfamiliar space, the sound of a moving vehicle frightens him, prompting him to hide behind a copy machine. But in doing so, he accidentally activates it, sending a loud noise echoing through the room. Spooked once again, he bolts. He dashes past an elevator before barging into a lab where he accidentally knocks over a jar of acid, burning his hand slightly. At that moment, the scientists cut the lights and Charlie is overwhelmed by fear. He scrambles onto the furniture, but his footing is unsteady, causing him to slip repeatedly and break various pieces of equipment. The commotion draws a scientist into the room. As the lights flicker back on, Charlie, still in a panicked state, reacts impulsively, launching his spear and killing the man instantly. Chaos erupts as the alarm blares, further fueling Charlie's distress. He blindly rushes through a random door, finding himself in a tunnel that grows colder the deeper he ventures. At the end, he spots a fire exit and seizes the opportunity, stepping outside into the frigid landscape. The sight of the helicopter reignites his excitement, and he instinctively chases after it. However, as he approaches, the pilot reacts swiftly, using the skis to knock him down. The scientists arrive moments later, retrieving Charlie and bringing him back indoors. Once examined, his X-rays confirm that he has sustained no serious injuries. Frustration mounts among the scientists, and they direct their anger toward Stanley, blaming his research for the tragic loss of their colleague. They declare the experiment over and decide to transfer Charlie to another facility. Stanley protests, insisting that confinement will kill him, but his objections are dismissed. Determined not to let Charlie be caged, Stanley discreetly strikes a deal with the guard. That night, he sneaks into the vivarium, carrying a bundle of furs. Once Charlie is properly dressed for the cold, the two set off into the snow. However, it doesn't take long for the scientists to realize they're missing. Tracking their footprints, they begin the pursuit. As Stanley and Charlie push forward, the ice beneath them starts to shift. Suddenly, a massive crevasse splits the ground, separating them. The roar of an approaching helicopter catches Charlie's attention, and his face lights up with excitement. He cries out, "Beta!" and without hesitation, leaps into the air. He manages to grip onto the helicopter's skis, chanting joyfully as he dangles mid-flight. One of the pilots reaches out in an attempt to pull him inside, but Charlie, believing he has finally met his destiny, lets go. With a peaceful expression, he glides through the open sky, soaring for miles before disappearing into the vast white expanse below.